Okay, I think we are finally live. Okay, I think we are finally... Yo! Alright, got people in the chat. How's the audio on your end? I got Philippe Garcia there, and Rissus TF, AC. Connor Graves, what's up? Not much, Connor Graves. Just here trying to start up this monthly live stream. Love the content from Connor Graves. Thank you very much. Can you guys hear me? Audio works on your end, sounds like? Fantastic. Shalom. Hello, Timur Erlenk. Timur. Shalom. Shalom right back to you. Jim Griffin. Audio seems a little low. Let's see. Let me fix that. All right, how does this sound? All right, Matt Richards. Hello to you. Philippe Garcia, yep. All right. How is everybody doing? Once more on the audio check, because I am not an audiophile. This is not my specialty. So, how does the audio sound? Just got to make sure it's all good. All right. All right. All right then. Let's start with all right, let's get some questions going here. What questions do you have? About a month ago when I last streamed, I think it was the runoff for the Georgia primary, for the Georgia elections, Senate elections that day. And if I recall, I predicted that Purdue would probably win. Loeffler could potentially win. But I predicted more or less Republican victories, and I was definitely wrong. That was very wrong. It was still a close loss, but yeah, I was not expecting everything to have happened in the last few weeks, the last month that happened then. So yeah, that's a bit. Let's see. Zane Rossler asks, with Cypher et al., can we expect a video about the Science Wars? We've been talking about doing a... We have been talking about... We've been talking about doing a video about the Science Wars for a while, but like since the first big panel we did last year, but we just haven't gotten around to it. For whatever reason, I guess we couldn't find an instance in the news that made it worth doing. All right, I guess another audio check. It looks like somebody thinks the mic needs to be turned up a bit. All right, how does that sound now? Another question here. Connor Graves asks, you like hockey, bud? I am not a hockey guy. I'm not even really much of a sports guy, to be honest. That was never my forte. Yeah, I worked at I basically worked at what you could functionally call a sports bar. Technically, it was a pub, served food and whatnot, but it was in reality a sports bar. And I worked there for like 7 years back in community college. And I remember having to clean up. I worked as a dishwasher, and your job is to clean up after people's fun. And like every sporting event that would happen there, you know, everyone would cheer like, we won. It's like, you did nothing. You sat on your ass for the last 4 hours, drank beer, and made a mess for me to clean up. So yeah, I'm not a big sports fan. All right, Simon Hulkster. What would you say are the main differences between liberalism and libertarianism? Well, it depends on what kind of liberalism you're talking about, because the word liberalism has been sort of tossed around a lot in the last century. Like in the 19th century, liberalism would have been more recognizable as what we typically call classical liberalism today. But between the Progressive era and the New Deal, liberalism was sort of changed. The meaning of it changed from being about like the 19th century classical style liberalism to being, progressivism, or like early 20th century progressivism, which are two very different things. Like 20th century early 20th century progressivism is very different from classical liberalism. And then there's neoliberalism, which is an attempt to, is neoliberalism, contrary to a lot of what people try to say, it's an attempt to try and bring elements of classical liberalism and New Deal liberalism together. And that's what it really is. There's a lot of people going around saying other things. That's what it really is. It's an attempt to try and fuse the two. Libertarianism, as I made a video about it a few years ago, or at least I made a video about the differences, or at least what I saw as the differences between classical liberalism and libertarianism. And for me, the difference I saw it was libertarianism is classical liberalism in light of communist atrocities. That's basically, libertarianism has far less trust for government and public institutions, whereas liberalism, or classical liberalism, has more trust in the institutions of the state. So yeah, Charlie Adams, are you a Republican? Technically on paper I am, but I haven't voted for a Republican president my entire voting life. Like, my first election I was legally old enough to vote in was in 2008, and I didn't vote for John McCain. I didn't vote for Barack Obama either. I ended up leaving just the presidential spot blank. Yeah. So yeah, Matt Richards. What area of expertise? Mine area of interest is the Civil War. My area, I don't know if I would say I have a real area of expertise. I tend to jump from one sort of niche intellectual kind of history to another as fascinates me. Like, that's how I get a video about like a Japanese shrine in Japan, and also videos about like the history of Holocaust denial on the same channel. I jump from whatever niche thing catches my attention at any moment. See, Connor Graves. We the people don't want Science Wars videos. We want a series on the Cola Wars of the 1980s. You'll get what I give you, Connor. And Rissus TF. So for your whole shift, what did you occupy your mind with as the dishwasher? Asking for a friend. Well, depending on the time period, so I was a dishwasher for 7 years. For the first 3.5 of it, you just kind of, it's hard to even to remember what I did those first few years, to be honest, or at least how I occupied my time. I mostly just trying to keep up, because I was a dishwasher at a very busy place on weekends. And so you didn't really have much time to just sit around and not do anything. The latter half of those years, I was allowed to basically listen to something over little earbuds, so I was listening to a lot of podcasts and audiobooks. And so I blew through a bunch of audiobooks starting at around early 2014. And that was also when I started listening to podcasts, and well, that's where I am now. See, Machiavelli's Paradox. Hey man, I'm a new sub, a week. What are your simplified political views? Whew, boy. I am what some people call nowadays a conservatarian. Conservatarians used to be called fusionists back in the 80s, and fusionists used to be called neoconservatives. As it turns out, neoconservatism has far more to do with non-foreign policy issues than it does foreign policy. But thanks to like the Bush administration and whatnot, everyone has solely associated neoconservatism with foreign policy, even though most neoconservative publications and writers and thinkers have said very little about actual foreign policy. So yeah. I guess the only consistency is that neoconservative foreign policy, as like formulated in during the Cold War years of like National Review, they were very aggressive in the Cold War against communism. You had the Truman Doctrine, which was based on the idea of containment of communism, whereas the neoconservatives wanted to do another type of foreign policy they called rollback, which is not just you try to stop communism from expanding, but actively make it retreat from places. I don't know if I would fall under that kind of area for foreign policy, but a lot of other stuff for neoconservatism, as I gotten older, I realized, oh, yeah, this is basically what my views were. But otherwise, it's evolving, or at least the label evolves. My actual views haven't changed too much over the last number of years. It's just what label do you place on them. All right, let's see. Let's go to Patreon for a moment. See what Patreon questions patrons have left. Felipe Garcia on Patreon asks, "What's your favorite war in ancient history and medieval history?" I think in ancient history, I don't really study the details of wars too much from ancient history. I've always been more of a politics guy. But when it comes to, like, I guess the political situation around wars in ancient and medieval times, I think, like, the politics around the Punic Wars are kind of interesting. And for the medieval world, I would say the funnest political situation around a medieval war is probably the 100 Years' War. It's like sort of the intellectual backflips that the British try to do to justify going to war with France, saying, yes, France is rightly ours because the daughter of the king is the mother of our king. The daughter of the French king is the mother of our king, and therefore we have claim? Even though all the countries at that time are more or less practicing, male primogeniture. Yeah, so I guess those the answers would be Punic Wars for the ancient world and the 100 Years' War for the medieval world. And I know another question from Felipe Garcia in the chat. What are your thoughts on the indigenous movement? I think the indigenous movements vary from country to country, so I can't say for certain about that. I know like the Native American political movements in the U.S. are a lot about, either getting land or some kind of monetary compensation. Let's see. Garrett Allen, sorry for being late. I was listening to Wild One by Iggy Pop. Don't know who that is. Yeah, Didymus, how did you define left wing versus right wing? That's another thing that keeps changing in my head. For one, I'm not typically a fan of a typical left-right spectrum because I don't think, for one, it's not super scientific, but also it misses a lot of nuances because, like, someone who's quote-unquote right-wing can be, like, a hardcore Nazi or, like, an anarcho-capitalist, which are very different things, but they're both called right-wing. And someone on the left can be, like an anarcho... and it can be an anarcho-communist and then a totalitarian communist, which are both very different. Though I would say the differences between an anarcho-communist and a totalitarian communist, I'd say an anarcho-communist and totalitarian communist have more in common with each other than an ANCAP and a Nazi do. But, you know, that's just the way it is. So, yeah, I'd say the general view, I would say, for if you want left-wing and right-wing, especially in a modern context, is a left-winger typically wants more government involvement in your life, wants more like government control over the economy, whereas a right-winger wants less government control over the economy. But once again, that varies depending on what makes someone left or right. Machiavelli's paradox. I'm a libertarian socialist, not anarcho-communism. I would love to debate sometime. I am not a debater. Debating is not something I really like doing. I've learned that from a long time. Like I am a ex-political activist, and I can tell you I am exhausted from debates. I find much more intellectual stimulation through conversation rather than debate. So, you know, bouncing ideas off of people and learning is far more rewarding than, you know, owning the insert whatever political label you're against here. Connor Graves, sometime take a look at the Crow Creek Massacre. Happened only 10 miles from my house. Fascinating piece of pre-Columbus Native American history that not a lot of people know about. I'll take a look at it at some point. I don't do too much American Indian history, so I can't say I know too much about it either way. Garrett Allen, just had to let y'all know that. All right then. And RISS TF, what's your definition of national security? Would intellectual property be included? Well, can intellectual property be included as a national security concern? And to an extent, I think you can make that argument, especially when it comes to like technological intellectual property stuff, like, you know, well, yeah, basically technology, software, things like that can be. I think you can make the argument that those are national security concerns. But then again, we have a whole separate area of law for that. You know, I think it's technically falls under the umbrella of intellectual property, but more specifically, it would be like patents and whatnot. And so you have countries like China, which are infamous for violating Western patents. All right. Now, Matt Richards, have you heard of a channel called Biographics that does videos on historical figures? I have. That is one of Simon Whistler's. God, how many channels does Simon Whistler have now? I don't know. He's just, yeah, I don't know. I have no idea how much, like, how intelligent Simon Whistler actually is, because with the amount of output that guy has, there's no way he's doing all that research himself. You know, it's like numerous videos, like depending on the individual channels, a day or a week, when most educational channels have a hard time getting one video out per week. Yeah, he's definitely not doing it all himself. He's definitely more of a host than he is a researcher or educator. Garrett Allen, thoughts on the GameStop trading? I say everyone's being a bit of a baby about this. You know, obviously the hedge fund managers who decided to, short the GameStop stock are, being babies. It's like, hey, look, when you guys invested all this money, you knew the risks. You just didn't expect anybody to actually make that risk more likely. And at the same time, the GameStop people are like, they're stopping us from trading. It's like, I mean, sure, yeah, it's a shitty thing Robinhood did that, but then again, you're investing on someone else's platform. So, that's one of the risks. It's like everybody is playing with their own money and taking risks. And they should all be able to reap the consequences thereof. I definitely don't want the government to come in and making laws saying, oh, you're not allowed to short stock, or oh, you're not allowed to short squeeze. Because as it turns out, the market has a pretty good way of self-correcting on issues like this. And after you have this, the GameStop short squeeze by the Reddit bros, I think one thing we're going to see, the hedge fund managers and other investors do in the future is they are going to be less likely to do shorting in the future. I think they're going to be less likely to do that. It's just going to be sort of a piece of wisdom of, hey, don't do shorting. It's a little too dangerous. Kind of like buying on margin. You just don't do that anymore. Jasmine Mendez, thoughts on coup d'etat plans, attacks in the U.S. right now? I don't think there are any coup d'etat plans or attacks in the U.S. right now. There was that. There was the incident on January 6th, the insurrection. It's hard even to describe it because, it's a self-coup because Donald Trump was still technically in power and he's going to overthrow the government while he's still in power. It's an odd situation. It was clearly, the inciting of, it's like the crowd, even telling them to march on the Capitol, was clearly meant to intimidate members of Congress into overturning the election results. That's pretty obvious. Whether or not it counts as a full-blown coup is just kind of hard to tell. We need a lot more information. It implies a lot more organization than there actually was. Charlie Adams. Were the Nazis socialists? Well, they talked about socialism a lot. Obviously, they had it in their name. There are those who think the idea that the Nazis are left-wing or were socialists is completely crazy. I would disagree with them. But, I don't throw out the traditional wisdom, not anymore anyways, that the Nazis were right-wing, but the idea that they were socialists is not entirely crazy. Like, if you want the best argument for, the Nazis having more in common with the left than they do with the right, you should definitely read Jonah Goldberg's book, Liberal Fascism. It's very interesting, and it gives probably the best argument if you want to make that argument. Also from Charlie Adams, what religion are you? This is something I get asked every week, and I've said it many times. I am a Lutheran of the Missouri Synod Church. All right, and Rissa's TF. Without government regulation, though, through Jim Crow laws, how long do you think it would have took before the South desegregated, given that it's an obvious market advantage? Well, here's the thing. Segregation isn't an obvious market advantage. You see, there were a lot of, for example, in the South, say you had the two major soda companies in the U.S. You had Coca-Cola and Pepsi. Coca-Cola refused to advertise to African Americans, but Pepsi decided to take advantage of Coca-Cola not advertising to them and did advertise to them. And so Pepsi became sort of the brand, and especially in the South, that became associated with, desegregation. So they were able to gain a much bigger hold in the African American market there. So there's no inherent reason why. And plus, a lot of the, a lot of the segregation that occurred in the South was government mandated segregation. And that's the difference, it wasn't segregation across most of the U.S. wasn't individual store owners deciding not to serve African Americans, because that's a dumb economic decision. It's like choosing to say, oh, I'm not going to provide my services to this clientele. That's just a stupid decision. I'm reminded of a line from an episode of an early season of Family Guy. It's like, it doesn't matter if you're black or white, because the only color that matters is green. And that's the ultimate reason why I think Jim Crow would have eventually gone away. It would make it makes more sense to open your services and products to as many people as possible. It's like segregation is a stupid business decision. And I personally believe in people, suffering the consequences of their actions. And so if you're running a business that refuses to serve people of a certain race or religion or gender or whatever, that's your poor decision. And it should be your right to make it. So yeah, Garrett Allen, what's your thought on the political compass up and down being more or less authoritarian, left, right, being more or less libertarian, depending on where you're at? I definitely prefer the political compass over, over the simple, left, right kind of political spectrum. I definitely think it's a lot more accurate. But then again, but I think it's a useful visualization tool. But any kind of test people create to try and place where you are on that chart are really hard to make, because it's kind of really hard to create a test that sounds politically neutral. Because you can tell when you take a version of the political compass test, oh, this one was written by lefties, or this one was written by righties, this one was written by libertarians or by socialists or by Marxists or whatever, They phrase the questioning in such a way that it pushes you towards, oh, well, I don't want to do the thing that makes me sound like a bad guy, so I'll pick the thing that makes me sound less bad, and then pushes you in a probably less accurate direction. Let's see. Emeritus TF again. I mean that desegregation was the market advantage. I'm not exactly sure what you're saying. Bottom line is, desegregation was not an advantage for the market. That's all I'm saying there. Fahad Hussein. Hello, Casual Historian. Well, hello to you, Fahad. I hope I'm saying your name right. Charlie Adams. I doubt socialism would have ended without federal input. Segregation was largely about identity. Economics doesn't really have any play there, except maybe keeping whites in better employment. Now, that's one thing it did on occasion, but economics is the reason why I think segregation would have eventually ended one way or another. It's just bad business. See, Fish. What do you think about the Common Sense Party? Never heard of them. Alec Leeper. Who wins the Republican nomination in 2024 if Trump doesn't run? I don't like predicting the future much anymore, especially because it's really hard to tell. It's going to depend a lot on what happens in the next 2 to 4 years. Well, in the next 2 to 3 years, it's going to matter a lot. Do the Republicans retake the House in 2022, like usually happens during the first midterm election of a Democratic president? Or do they lose it? Do they lose seats? Do they lose the Senate? That is a very important question. That's going to depend a lot on how willing is Biden to work with the Republicans. Are the Democrats in Congress going to push through their own, COVID relief package without the Republican support, which will end up being a lot like the 2009 stimulus bill, which completely shut Republicans out of the decision-making process, and which ended up having 0 Republican votes, and started off a trend of the Obama administration just not working with Republicans, and then Republicans replying in kind. See, Garrett Allen, favorite Christian song, Our God is a Mighty Fortress, is pretty nice sounding. It is, yeah. Yeah, it is, let's see, favorite Christian song. Well, that depends on the time of year, of course, Christmas time, I'm a big lover of some of the classic English, the English carols, especially God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen is one I like for Christmas time. Yeah, as I've gotten older, I've tended to like the ones more that emphasize sort of proper theology. Yeah, Timur, yes, agree. There was a question in Political Compass about bottled water. That was a provocative question. Yeah, it depends on which version of the Compass test you're taking. So yeah, learning through life. Your videos are great, man. You're so well put together and edited. I was really impressed when I saw a video of yours a few weeks back and was subbed ever since. Well, thank you, Learning Through Life. Oh, history and headlines. Hello there, Dr. Czar. Happy Groundhog's Day in snowy Ohio. From snowy Ohio. Well, happy Groundhog's Day to you. Puxatony Phil just gave us 6 more weeks of winter, and I, for one, can't be happier. California is way too hot for most of the year, so I hope that winter extends out here. So yeah, Machiavelli's Paradox. Thoughts on minor American separatist movements like the New England Independence Campaign? Something I'm part of. Interesting. Oh gosh, it's been a while since I've focused on any kind of American separatist movements. I have a few videos in the backlog of my channel about that from like back in 2016. I think I've made like 3 or 4 videos talking about secessionist movements in the United States. I stopped making those videos because it kept getting a lot of attention from like alt-righter and neo-Confederate types, and I didn't want them around my channel, so I stopped making those videos. Let's see. Charlie Adams. How do Republicans come back from the mightiest L from Trump to the sacking of the capital Constantinople? Well, let's just say this. I'd say the Capitol riot did more damage to the Republicans than Donald Trump's loss. Because even in the 2020 election results, Republicans did a lot better than anyone expected. They almost held on to the Senate. They gained seats in the House, almost held on to the Senate. But then Donald Trump decided to push a conspiracy theory, and that conspiracy theory built up over, a couple months until the Capitol riot happened. And so, yeah, Trump was a terrible thing for the Republican Party's chances, and it's going to depend on how long can the Democrats keep the existence of Donald Trump as a wedge issue within the Republicans. For Republicans, that's going to be the big kicker there. It's like, can the Republican Party wean itself or just completely kick Trump? Or are they going to be stuck with Trump for a while? Let's see. Alec Leaper. How do you approach explaining your faith to a non-believer? Well, that varies. It depends on, how well do I know this non-believer? What their individual experiences are. You tailor your answer to who you're talking to. That is the first step. Benjamin, you and the others on the U.S. teaching stream did a great job. Well, thank you, Benjamin. I didn't talk as much on that one as I might have liked to, but my mic was the settings on it for volume were a little too low, and I'm a tad too polite to interrupt people. So yeah, fish. Hi, what do you say to the suggestion that the government left and right is using stimulus as a political tool rather than a truly considering the people? Vague question, but all the same. Well, that's just part of the thing. It's like Biden has said, of course, that he wants to work across the aisle, that he wants to make deals. Like, there's a very interesting thing that I heard it in a podcast recently, and I can't remember which one it was that I heard it in. But basically, Joe Biden is the first president since Lyndon Johnson who actually likes the Senate. Because you see, most presidents who have come to the White House have spent very little to no time as a member in Congress. Donald Trump obviously had no public experience before going into office. Barack Obama spent less than a single term in the Senate. George W. Bush was a governor, never a member of a legislature. Bill Clinton, the same, was a governor, not a member of the national legislature. You also had, before that, George H.W. Bush. I can't remember. I think he may have served a term or two in Congress, but otherwise he never spent any time in the Senate, didn't have much love for Congress, and by the time he became president, he had been out of Congress for a long time. So given that, that is a big difference between Joe Biden and a lot of past presidents in the last 50, 60 years, is that he actually likes the Senate. And so you can see him making a deal. But of course, Biden also has to worry about, his left flank, It's like he has to worry about, like, Kamala Harris coming for his job in 2024. So it's going to be difficult to see. Biden has to try and play off the Republican Party against the left wing of his own party. Let's see. Spencer Waldshan. Are you hopeful that Holocaust denial and other forms of anti-Semitism will decrease, or will it see a resurgence? I always hope it will go away, but the thing about the internet is that it allows us to live in our own little silos, and Holocaust deniers have their own silos that they live in. They've been able to build it up. It's like once upon a time before the internet, a Holocaust denier would, wouldn't know any other Holocaust deniers in person. If it's like he might run into others if he went to like some kind of white supremacist gathering in person, where they're handing out like pamphlets and flyers and whatnot. But prior to the internet, you're usually just isolated. But once the internet became a thing, you can find random people everywhere. It's like that's why zoophiles are a bigger thing than before. Furries became much bigger thing once the internet became a thing. So yeah, unfortunately, I'm not as confident that, the future will see less anti-Semitism. I'm not confident in that anymore. Fahad Hussein, have you done any vid on Pol Pot? If not, would like to see that on your channel, buddy. Well, I have not done any videos on Pol Pot. Not even sure if I've referenced him at all. Not against it, but I'd probably have to be in a certain mood to make a video like that. See, Enristus TF, given the government is deeply entrenched with corporatism establishment, do you think the only way to install a new who governs through a revolution? In a libertarian model, ultra drain the swamp. Here's the thing. Drain the swamp is kind of just a bad slogan. Unfortunately, is that when you get rid of people who have experience in the institutions, you get rid of the people who know what they're doing. Like, you study the French Revolution, and something they did throughout the French Revolution is that, like, every time a new constitution was issued, they would ban everyone who ever served in the government beforehand from running for office in the new government. What that meant was you constantly had a new stream of people who did not know what they were doing. So, yeah, that's one of the issues there. Alec Leeper, how does the Republican Party hold onto the gains Trump made with voting groups usually do poorly with? African Americans, Latinos. Okay, well, something that should be understood about that is, like George W. Bush in 2004 did better with Latinos than Trump did in 2020. And although he improved performance with African Americans, that has more to do with the economy than anything he did. It also has more to do with the fact that he's not running against the first black president, Barack Obama. Because it turns out Barack Obama was really popular with African Americans just across the board, and no president will ever get as much of the African American vote as he did. So that's just going to be so he had nowhere to go but up when it came to performance with African Americans. And what can they do? Well, I would say if they want to keep that going, well, they could embrace some of the Reformicon ideas. They could make it easier to start businesses, encourage, basically put in place different incentives to encourage people to start businesses or, get to actually work. See, Armada conspiracy theory, it was pretty blatantly honest. Not sure what you're responding to there. Fish, fish, fish. Hopefully left and right will share more bipartisanship effort in 2021. We shall see. Indeed, we shall. It's going to depend a lot on what Biden is willing to do and willing to sacrifice, I think. Let's see. Dr. Khan blog. I strongly disagree that getting rid of Trump would solve the problem. If anything, Trump gave life to the party. It's the base that's the issue. Not entirely sure. Trump, obviously, I don't think Trump created it, but he definitely allowed the worst elements of the party to come out of hiding, and that was sort of the part of the problem there. See, history and headlines. George H.W. Bush served as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives for Texas 7th District from 1967 to 1971. Yeah, that's how I thought something like that had happened. Yeah, so he did serve briefly in the House of Representatives, but like I said, briefly, not a whole lot there, and he wasn't a huge fan of Congress by the time he finally became president. Purple pill philosophy. We need Tulsi 2024. That is a possibility. Alex, the Cardinals fan. I think Trump or Trump-like candidates will never help get that 7% of undecided Americans to vote red as long as he's a Republican. Yeah, that is definitely going to be an issue for them. Fish, fish, fish. I truly believe Kamala Harris will be the first woman president. If Biden's health holds, look for her to run in 2028. I don't know. I don't know if I can see Kamala Harris becoming the first woman president. It's like, for one, of course, if Biden health managed to hold and he's still alive in 2028, typically what happens is that in the post-war period, in the post-World War II American history, typically each political party holds the White House for about 8 years at a time. Now, granted, Trump was an outlier there, but then again, there was also the outlier before him of, of the Republicans holding it for 12 years between Reagan and H.W. Bush, and then the outlier of the Democrats only holding it for 4 years with Carter. But otherwise, each party tends to control it for 8 consecutive years, and then it passes over to the other party. And so if the Democrats win again in 2024, 2028 will probably be a year that the Republican Party will win again. It could be longer, though. I mean, once again, outliers do exist. Let's see, learning through life. Hi again. Maybe you already have. But could you do a video on communism versus National Socialism? It seems that people think they're opposites, even though they're both left-leaning economics. Well, it's something that could be done, but I'm not really looking to make a video like that right now. Said, if you want to learn more about stuff like that, I would highly recommend Jonah Goldberg's book, Liberal Fascism. It covers probably the best, Nazism has more in common with the left than the right argument that you could possibly find. Let's see, Jonah Goldberg's Liberal Fascism. And hold on, I think I have the book up here. Let me show you what the cover looks like. That's, what you're looking for. Yeah, so this is the book here. Liberal Fascism by Jonah Goldberg. The Secret History of the American Left, from Mussolini to the Politics of Change. So this is the one you would probably want to check that book out if you're really looking for the whole, Nazis are actually left-wing argument. That probably provides the best argument you'll ever find for it. Fish, fish, fish. What is your channel about? Subscribe first time watching live stream. Well, my channel, of course, The Casual Historian, is about history. I make history videos about whatever I'm interested in that time. It could be about, genocide denial, such as Holocaust denial or Holodomor denial. It could be about shrines, the tourist trap shrines to Jesus in Japan, and everything in between. See, that one Hawks fan, are you gonna make a Discord server or nah? At the moment, I'm leaning towards nah, because like I just don't think there's enough interest in it at this moment. Maybe at a later time, maybe later I'll do it, but right now there doesn't seem to be enough interest. Fish. Term limits for Congress could be considered for many reasons, but you're right about the France point. Yeah, that's like... So once upon a time, I used to be very much in favor of like strict term limits for Congress. Like, hey, like only like 3 terms for the House and 2 terms for the Senate. Only get 18 years in Congress. Now I'm a bit more open. Like, okay, 6 terms for the House and like 4 terms for the Senate. Something like that. And I'm even open to the idea of letting, like, if we have to pass a constitutional amendment to allow it, then say allowing individual states the right to place term limits on their own congressmen. That's something I would be interested in. A little more federalism. Alex the Cardinal fan, I think it's a sad reflection on our society at the moment that a man such as Pete Buttigieg, who was a very strong candidate, arguably wasn't able to win primaries only because he was homosexual. Actually, that's the thing. During the primaries, Pete Buttigieg, no one talked about his sexuality, like, at all. His sexuality was not a limitation on his success. The biggest limitation on his success was that nobody knew who the hell he was. That was the issue, because he was a mayor of a random town in the Midwest that no one's heard of. So, yeah. It's like, I remember one of the political commentators saying, like, I can't believe a homosexual did this well. And then another commentator responding, like, I can't believe a mayor did this well. Because as it turns out, mayors don't do too well in national politics. They just have too little national name recognition. Let's see, Alex Leeper. If you could appoint any politician as president, who would it be? Justin Amash. Justin Amash would be my go-to politician right now if I were to appoint someone as president. Yeah. That one Hawks fan, opinions on Constitution Party. The Constitution Party is basically just, at this point, it's like they're super into like tariffs, I know that. It's basically the Reform Party, but with more tariffs, basically. Let's see, have faith. The view from China. America is self-destructing. What a waste. If Americans have any idea of what China is cooking up over here, you all would stop fighting each other. Okay, duly noted. Alex the Cardinals fan, I think that policy-wise, they might be better than a centrist Buttigieg, but leadership-wise, I think he could prove to be better than anyone who could primary in a Democratic election for the Democrats. Let's see. Oh, people are talking to each other. Nice. All right, see, Dr. Comblog. The worst part of the Tea Party was already prevalent in the Tea Party era. The Dems exploited that too. You just need to talk to the base and rank and file. Many moderates rarely do. Spencer Waldshan. Oh, ooh, stuff jumped. Spencer Waldshan. What do you think is the best way we as a society can tackle current hyperpolarization? In a similar vein, do you think media reform is possible? Media reform isn't possible without putting much more control of the media into the hands of the government, and I don't really think that's a good idea, unfortunately. It's like, you don't want the government regulating or running speech. That's not a good way to do it. So there's not, unfortunately, when it comes to like reforming speech, reforming media, there's no good ways to do it. There are only bad ways, I think. And so I think the best way to reform media and hyperpolarization has to be sort of a private reform. As in, we all, I think, need to sort of for lack of better words, we all need to get off the internet a little more. Because the parts of the country that are the most polarized are the parts that are also on the internet all the time, and we don't interact with each other. And so we don't really realize that, oh, people are more normal than we think they are. You know, it's like not every right-winger is a QAnon Trumpy person, and not every left-winger is a, an Antifa red flag waving socialist who wants to give arbitrary sex changes to kids. Obviously that's not what either side is. And we all need to realize that, and we can do that more by actually talking with each other. But the technology we have, of course, just makes it really easy to silo yourself off from all outside opinions. Let's see. Timur, what do you think of Janet Yellen? No strong opinions either way. She's a very typical Fed chairman. Alec Leeper, how should Biden confront China as Trump's tariffs have had fairly poor results? Well, there are a number of ways. A big way we need to confront China, I think, is more on a moral front is definitely good, calling out China's bad actions. See, and I think another thing we could do is if you want to incentivize American in order to weaken China, you need to get foreign companies out of there. And one of the ways you could do that is say okay, we're going to get rid of certain tax exemptions for corporations who have X percentage of their manufacturing in China. So you can say, okay, all right, corporations, you can keep your tax exemptions and whatnot if you move your, production out of China. That could do a double whammy of, encouraging, American corporations to help sort of, modernize economies in other parts of the world as well as weaken China. But once again, you would want someone a little more familiar with that kind of stuff to give a more firm policy. All right, the One Hawks fan. If America's school system made a civics class mandatory, how would you make the class run? Well, for one, most schools do have civics courses. It's just the civics courses are usually incorporated into the history course. And if you're in the United States, especially in California, the civics portion is usually incorporated into the U.S. government class that most American high schoolers have to take at some point. So I would say the best way to do that, I think the best way to incorporate, U.S. civics is to incorporate it into other courses. So you could have, rather than just having a solo course of it on its own. So you should incorporate civics, American civics stuff more into history. You should incorporate it more into English or language arts, whatever it's being called at individual schools or grade levels. So yeah, incorporate it more into the other currently existing subjects. See, Alex the Cardinals fan. If you could have one new amendment ratified over any issue you deem should be unconstitutional, what would it be? Well, if I had to, there's several areas I would want to do this in. For a long time I've really wanted a balanced budget amendment. That would be something I would like, or an amendment, sort of giving the president the power of a line item veto. That would also be something nice. And those are for sort of fiscal changes. And if I had to go for a more polarized social issue, I would probably do something about abortion, a ban on abortion, probably. If I were to touch, a very polarizing issue that would line up with my own values. But, that's, yeah, it wouldn't be the top priority, but it's one of them. Fahad Hussein, are we seeing the resurgence of Nazism in Europe with extreme right-wing gaining grounds? And is there a possibility of another Hitler-like leader in Germany after the turmoil with immigration? I don't think a Hitler-like leader is possible in Germany specifically. You could see a Hitler-type leader. I think if we see a Hitler-type leader emerge in Europe again, it's going to be more likely out of like a former Soviet bloc country, I think. Like Poland is a possibility, as is Hungary. It's going to be an Eastern European country, I think, if we get another Hitler-type figure. Charlie Adams, how do you verify your sources and make sure they are good when you make videos? Well, here's the thing. The first part of the process for making a video is finding sources. And so during the sourcing process, you find already trusted sources and then just go from there. Now, of course, more niche subjects will usually require more more research into things. Like when I did my Jesus shrine, like a Jesus shrine in Japan video, there wasn't a single place I could go for that. There wasn't a single book that had it. I had to piece that together from a bunch of different, like, non-connected sources. Same thing I had to do when I was making the History Channel video last year, is that story that I told in the History Channel video about what's ruining it, or what mistake they made, that story didn't exist as a whole anywhere before I made that video. I had to pull up press releases and interviews from like the early 2000s that no one's thought of since they existed. And so how you verify the reliability of sources varies from project to project. But the best way to do it is to start with already trusted sources and then go from there. See, that one Hawks fan, what software you use to edit videos and make maps? I am a user of the Adobe suite of software. So I use, to make the maps themselves, I use Adobe Illustrator, and I usually take a pre-existing map I use one that's, I think, from NASA. It's a very high resolution, a big high resolution map, satellite map of the world that I get from NASA. NASA's pictures and maps and whatnot from NASA are all public domain, so you can use them for free. And then I just overlay, using the line tool to create, maps overlaid on top of it. So that's what I mainly use for the map. I sometimes have to use Photoshop, especially if I'm making elements that are supposed to be overlaid on the map, like, oh, here's a flag or an army guy or a tank or whatever. I need him moving around the map. And so what I'll usually do is I'll mock up something like that in Photoshop, then import that Photoshop document into Illustrator, and then export that as an Adobe Illustrator file. And the reason you would want to do that, along with doing maps in Adobe Illustrator, is because Adobe Illustrator files are what's known as vector files. And vector files, when in the right programs, can resize and not lose their resolution. So you can blow it up and it won't look all pixelated. And so I then take those and so when doing map animations, you would put those into After Effects, which can utilize vectors. So yeah, that's that. Sebastian Mazzo, that History 101 guy was really stupid. I think it's US 101 or whatever, but yeah, he's very strong in his opinions. I prefer to be diplomatic. see. And Rissus TF, will Newsom get recalled? I believe they have 1.2 million signatures. In case that he does, will he win again? Well, I'm not entirely sure. The situation right now for Newsom is different than it was for Gray Davis in 2003. Granted, the economy's in a bad state like it was when Gray Davis was called. So I guess it's going to depend on how angry Democrats in California are with Newsom for like lifting the lockdown. And in different parts of California, they are very angry with him for doing that. Let's see. Like a Boss Stewart, what do you agree with the left on? Well, I think criminal justice reform is definitely something that I don't like the fact that the left has managed to monopolize. Criminal justice reform is something I definitely want to change. I'm not a big fan of the drug war, but that, of course, having those views doesn't really make you a lefty. It makes someone like me with those views usually makes them a libertarian. Let's see. Oh boy. Let's see. Fish. You make a good point about the government regulating free speech. Unfortunately, the second impeachment of Trump may be a catalyst for a policy change heading in that direction. I don't know. It's like both the Republican and Democratic parties have had like sort of they both had this sort of urge for the last 4 years to do something about social media companies. You know, like the Democrats have been wanting to regulate social media companies because they are not cracking down on speech they say they disagree with enough. You know, they're not censoring enough, whereas the Republicans want them to censor less. So, yeah, they both have reasons to go after them, but they want different results. Let's see. Dr. Khan blog saying Nazism is left-wing, is American-centric, and ignores how the left and right in Europe at times. Plus, it's an example of a political hot potato, as no one wants to be associated with the Nazis. And that's true, yes. Yes, that's definitely the case. And of course, even that liberal fascism book I showed people is very much American-centric. It shows like how basically Nazism doesn't really fit into the American concept of being right-wing. And it shows how basically American left and right is very different from left and right in Europe. Let's see. Machiavelli's paradox. American civics in context, basically, right? Yeah, that's a very important thing, I think. Yeah, put American civics lessons into history and even English and language arts courses, I think, is valuable, and that provides some context. Alex Winter, what's up with the new background colors? Oh, are you talking about the lights behind me? There's like a red light and a blue light. I just like setting an atmospheric tone. I can change that. Hold on a second. And I can change another one. And Yeah, I've got some LED lights inside some regular lighting fixtures, and they can change colors. Let's see. Alec Leeper, how much ground do you think Biden's left flank will make in terms of their influence over him over the next 4 years? Well, let's see. For the next 2 years, he has a little more wiggle room, but that's mostly because the Senate is split 50-50. And even though Kamala Harris, of course, does get to be the tie-breaking vote, Kamala Harris only gets to vote if there's an actual tie. But if some Democrats decide to break with the rest of their party on something, such as Joe Manchin or Kyrsten Sinema, decide to break with their party on something, Biden can't get anything done that way. So even though it's split 50-50, Joe Manchin could vote with the Republicans from time to time, as could Kyrsten Sinema, depending on the issue. Let's see. Alex Winter, what are your hopes for February? My hopes for February are to get at least 3 videos out on the channel. I guess technically 4, since I'm now doing live streams the first Tuesday of each month, and then each following Tuesday is going to be a video, and that's sort of the plan for the rest of the year. And so, yeah, that's sort of the plan. And that is the hope. Let's see. Hardy Hat. Any recommendations for places getting non-copyrighted media? See, well, on YouTube, you can find the U.S. National Archives YouTube channel. Everything on there is considered public domain. Inside the YouTube, see, if you have access to the YouTube back end, they also have a music archive where they have a bunch of stuff that you can put on YouTube that is varying levels of copyright free, that you can, at the very least, freely use them on YouTube. And any of the stuff that comes from like the Marine Corps band or something like that, those are also tend to be public domain. I would also suggest going to the Internet Archive and looking at different video libraries like the Prelinger library. Prelinger has a bunch of old videos that are all public domain. So yeah. Alex Winter, do you agree that Doug Ducey sucks eggs? Can't remember who Doug Ducey is at the top of my head. Garrett Allen, I'm sure you've gotten this question before, but have you heard of What If Alt Hist? He's an alternate history channel. He's been doing a lot of geopolitical videos, and he's libertarian. I know who he is. What If Altist? I know who he is. He's on a Slack group that I'm a part of. Don't think he's too active in the community though, but he's there. And his videos show up in my recommended feed. However, his videos usually show up in my recommended feed next to like Monsieur Z. So I tend to avoid Monsieur Z. See, and Rissus TF. In the live stream 5 months ago, I felt the others sort of dismissed left influence in the classroom. I was like, come on, CH, say something, and you finally said. Yes, I think they're doing. It's like, I think a lot of them would dismiss sort of left-wing influences in the classroom, but I think it's kind of like, it's not an intentional, they're not intentionally ignoring it, it's just they don't recognize it when they see it, because it's like asking a fish how wet the water is. They're not even aware that there's water. Yeah, fish. Do you hold any degrees? I do. I have an associate's degree in social and behavioral sciences, and I have a bachelor's degree in history. And Rissus TF, quote, I think saying that nothing is going on here is a little ridiculous. Haha, one dude's lips started to twitch. Let's see. Readout Productions. What is your opinion of history days/months? I'll take any history promotion, but don't like how the media seems to keep putting everyone in isolated groups. No diffusion seems allowed. I'm not entirely sure what you're asking. Like I'm referring to such things as Black History Month, Hispanic History Month. You could even lump St. Patrick's Day in the way America treats it. Like when I was younger, I definitely had a bigger problem with sort of like X History Month or X History Day, but nowadays I don't really mind so much anymore. You know, it's like, yeah, it's whatever, you know. People can focus on what they do, whatever they want to. Dr. Khan blog, I'm increasingly of the opinion that the GOP is too ideologically bankrupt and divided to govern and be popular, and tax isn't enough. We should sit things out for a generation to figure things out. Well, here's the problem with that. The last time the GOP sat things out for a generation was the New Deal. It drastically changed the government and society in ways that were not all good. So sitting it out, I don't think is really an option anymore. And I don't think it's ideologically bankrupt. I think it's I'd definitely be willing to say that the current GOP seems to be morally bankrupt and maybe even politically bankrupt, but I don't see them as being ideologically bankrupt. In fact, I would say it's that they've ignored their actual ideology instead what they've really been doing is just following the cult of Trump. Alex Leeper, what would have to occur for California to elect a Republican governor? Honestly, at this point, I'm not entirely sure. I think the former mayor of San Diego, Kevin Faulconer, just announced, and he's going to be running as a Republican, and he's a moderate. So who knows? I mean, there is a slim chance they could win, especially because of like how strict the lockdowns in California have been and how a lot of people don't like that. So it's a possibility. But then again, Newsom just lifted the statewide lockdown orders. But granted, that meant very little, actually, because most of the lockdowns being held across the state are being sort of enforced by local and county governments rather than the state government. So so sort of a meaningless gesture on his part. Let's see. All right, Alex Winter, do you think some distrust of the media is okay? I think some distrust of the media is okay, just as some distrust of government is okay, and some distrust of, corporations is okay. That's just the thing, though. It's some. A lot of people over the last decade or so now have saying, oh, well, if you don't trust them on this, then why should you trust them on anything else? Be their guiding light when it comes to sort of public and private institutions. Fish. Let's get the casual historian into grad school. The only reason I haven't gone to grad school is because the job market for teaching is not very good. Especially if you're history. You're saying if I get a graduate degree in history, I don't know what I would do with it. Because I don't need a graduate degree to do YouTube. And if you get a graduate degree in history, what else are you going to do other than teach? There are things I would like to do, but all those other things I'd like to do, you don't need a graduate degree for that. And I know how to read graduate level text, so it's not like I need their instruction on how to do it. See, Alex, the Cardinals fan, I think there's still good leaders in the GOP such as Romney and in some ways Rubio, but sitting out doesn't allow for political discourse that helps our country. Yeah, that's true. There's unfortunately the Trump years created a lot of damaged goods when it came to a number of Republicans. Let's see, Garfield Alighieri, do you think the GOP will try to get politicians like Marjorie Taylor Greene out like how Democrats try to primary progressives like AOC and other Justice Dems? Well, for one, I think the Justice Dems have a much stronger position within the Democratic Party than the Marjorie Taylor Greens do within the Republican Party, but it's not looking good. The difference, how, of course, is that the QAnon types in the Republican Party are more egregious than the Justice Democrats are, unfortunately. And because they seem more egregious, like basically the Democrats and the left and like left-wing media are turning Marjorie Taylor Greene into what like Fox and the Republicans and right-wing media turned AOC and the Squad into. You know, they're giving them a disproportionate amount of attention because it's a lot easier to mock the other side when you're pointing out their most egregious members. Machiavelli's paradox: will America survive as is for another 20 years? I think it will. America as a country will continue to exist. What the state of its politics is like is up for is anyone's guess. See, Alec Leeper, what do you think of so many Republican senators not seeking re-election in 2022? For a lot of them, it's just they're kind of done with it. Like, they don't want to have to deal with the current state of politics. Because there's a certain things that's like, you just don't want to deal with that anymore. And so you could fight against it and potentially lose, or you can just get out while you can. And I think that's the position that a lot of them have. Let's see. Timur, asking degree sounds like classism. To put a person in a certain category based on given information. Okay, I think it's part of another conversation going on. And Rissus TF, do you occasionally watch Vosh or Amazing Atheist just to get your blood boiling? Not really. I've never really watched Vosh. Like, I remember like a year or so ago when suddenly it was like he was interacting a lot or being associated a lot with like, oh gosh, what's her name? Kick myself, can't remember her name. Armored Skeptic's ex-girlfriend. Yeah, it's like for some reason the two of them were being associated together. An Amazing Atheist, I don't even think he goes by that name anymore, but that's the only name I know him by. And not really know, I don't really watch them much or at all. That one Hawks fan, how do you think the GOP will change their ideology again? GOP changes a lot quicker in ideology terms. Did they turn Bushism from Tea Party to Trump? I'm not sure. It's going to be a lot. It's going to depend on how willing. I would say this. The 2022 midterms are going to be a big determiner. You know, it's like, will rank and file voting Republicans reject Trumpism and the QAnon faction of the party, or will they vote them in? Because 2022 will be a make or break year for the GOP, I think. Dr. Comblog, like I said, this doesn't start and end with Trump. People ignore how bad Bush 43 was, or how Bush, I think you meant 41 was a one-termer too, or even the negative effects of Reagan. Well, for one, I think Bush 43's reputation is at the beginning phase of recovery. Now, of course, part of that reason for recovery, of course, is that some in the media they'll use any past Republican to criticize the current Republican. That's just how it's going to be. You know, like people were starting to reappraise Bush Sr. during the years of Bush 43, simply because they could attack the current president with the reputation of a former. But yeah, and also from Dr. Comblog, Trump is simply a symptom. This is what you don't get. It's like, well, no, I've said for a long time that he was a symptom. No, I've never said that he caused the problem. I'm saying he allowed a problem that existed to get worse. Let's see. Garrett Allen, do you think Trump was ultimately good for America despite the damage, showing us the danger of China, polarization? I had a debate about this with family. I was drunk and wanted to ask. There was a time where I would have thought that, okay, he was ultimately had some good things, but at the end of the day, I'm not sure if the few good things that happened while he was president are worth all the bad things. And because here's the thing, all of the good stuff that happened when Trump was president, most of it were things that any other Republican would have done. Like the tax cuts, any Republican would have passed a similar set of tax cuts because Trump had nothing to do with those tax cuts. Rather, those tax cuts were those were the baby of Paul Ryan. And then there are the judges. Like it's like he ended up appointing a large number of like Federalist Society judges. Well, those were the same kinds of judges that a President Cruz or Rubio would have appointed. And most of the judge job was left to picking judges was left to, the Federalist Society and Mitch McConnell. They're the ones that did all the work on the judges. And even the foreign policy stuff he had limited involvement in, that seemed to mostly be the job now of like Jared Kushner, of all people, made the best foreign policy decisions of the Trump administration. Whatever corruptions may have been involved in the deal as well. So I think Trump, at best, right now, I think Trump could expect like a Jimmy Carter type legacy. Is the best outcome for him. Let's see. Alex, the Cardinals fan, in all honesty, I think the GOP will adopt more liberal ideas in the future and put a more conservative spin on them, such as universal or affordable health care. That's a possibility. I don't know how they would do it, at least not anytime in the near future. Alec Leaper, feelings toward the Snyder Cut. I have none. I have no strong feelings about it one way or the other. I thought I thought the theatrical release of Justice League was okay. I'm not hugely invested in the DC versus Marvel. I prefer Marvel, but I'm not hugely invested. Let's see. Felipe Garcia, what's your position on school choice in the US? I think there should be more of it. I think we need a huge reform of the educational system in the US. We should say, I prefer voucher programs. Money should follow where the child goes, not be attached to a school district. So if a parent wants to put their kid in private school, the voucher program can let that happen. We need to open up competition for schooling because right now there currently just isn't any. There is functionally no competition in education. Public schools have a virtual monopoly. So yes, I think more school choice is better. So yeah, that one Hawks fan. What headset and mic are you using? Well, the mic I'm using is an Audio-Technica AT2020. And the headset I'm using, it's listed on it. Hold on. And the headset I'm currently using is the ATH M50X. Yeah, the AT50 M50X, I saw a review for it in a MKBHD video. It came highly recommended from him and a few other tech reviewers, so I went and got it. They're all saying it's the best value for under $500, and I definitely agree. One of the problems I'm having, though, with the headset is that I now hear audio issues and recordings that I couldn't before, and I don't know how to fix them. Yeah, so all right. Timur, don't take it personally, Fish. Oh, okay. More chat conversation. Good. All right. Readout Productions. Oh, Jimmy Carter, the one president I randomly end up collecting memorabilia from. Yeah. So I think Trump's legacy, I think the best outcome for a Trump legacy is to be Carter-like, in that, okay, there was a few things he did that were ultimately good in the long run, but we're not going to appreciate it right now. But otherwise, he kind of had a terrible, like, domestic policy. Yeah, Alec Leaper, have you watched WandaVision? I have. I caught up to the series today watching the last 2 episodes. Really good. Highly recommend watching it if you're a fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and have Disney+. Stephen Blythe, what do you think is the biggest issue that Joe Biden can do good on? Joe Biden has 2 main mandates for his presidency. The first is to not be Donald Trump, which he achieved on his first day in office by not being Donald Trump. And the other is going to be coronavirus. And so that's going to depend on, what kind of recovery bills can be passed and how much it can actually work, even if we did pass a big one. And his third mandate, or his third sort of, I think, main goal he can do to be a good president is to try and, tamp down on the polarization and, help find a middle ground between the American left and right. That's going to be a really hard job to do, especially because Biden is not as centrist as people want to think he is. He is always very much a centrist within the context of the Democratic Party, which makes him solidly on the left in terms of American politics. So there's always going to be some issues there. But those are his 3 biggest things that he needs to work on. Let's see, Dr. Khan blog. What's sad is that I align with the moderate conservative Reformicon, even libertarian types, but it frustrates me how many ignore the rank and file due to class. I would love to have a discussion. Well, yeah, I guess it depends on what you're meaning by class, but yeah, it's something that could be discussed at some point. See, Alec Leaper. It's always interesting watching your streams with Cypher, Mr. Beat, etc., where you clearly disagree but don't go all the way in voicing your view. Well, something you learn is, especially when you have an opinion that most of the others don't have, is you have to learn when to pick your battles. And I've learned not to pick battles that I think will get me dogpiled on. That's something I try to avoid. It's one of the reasons I stopped getting into debates on Facebook. It's because I might disagree with somebody on Facebook on something, and then suddenly a bunch of their friends all come in and dogpile. And that's not a fruitful way to have a discussion or debate. And I'm not even a big fan of debate anymore, as I said before, I prefer discussion, and yeah. So it's all about learning to pick your battles. Philippe Garcia, what motivated you to make the Kurds history video? Well, of course, that was made back in, the last year just totally warped my mind. I can't remember if the Kurds video I made was late 2018 or late 2019. I can't remember which. But it had to do with President Trump's decision to, he announced that he was going to pull U.S. troops out of Syria, which he ended up not actually doing. So yeah, that was sort of the motivating factor. And it's and you had everyone suddenly criticizing, how dare he pull troops out of Syria? It's you had a lot of Democrats and left-wingers who criticized Bush for starting wars and were constantly calling on him to pull out of Iraq when, the terrorists were winning. And now Trump wanted us to pull out of the war in better conditions than they were asking to pull out of Iraq, and suddenly he's Hitler for wanting to not start wars. You know, that weird chestnut. So it's like, hey, let's look at, you know, let's look at this more objectively. And that was my motivation behind the Kurds video, because yes, I talked about some bad things about the Kurds, how they were used a lot within sort of their history has a lot of, you know, persecuting religious minorities involved in it. But then their modern history is a lot of them being persecuted themselves. So, you know, I tried to make a balance there. See, Alec Leaper, I especially noticed it when you guys were discussing dog whistles in the 1776 report. Yeah, like I said, so in the 1776 report, a bunch of the other people in that conversation I had in the Cynical Historian's latest panel video, they were all saying, oh, there's a bunch of these dog whistles, and I'm like, I'm not hearing dog whistles. Like, if you're hearing dog whistles, you're the dog. Or at least that's what I thought. That's what I would love to say. I just want to tell them, it's like, sometimes somebody talking about law and order isn't, you know, sometimes somebody saying law and order isn't actually a dog whistle for putting down black people. Sometimes law and order is literally just law and order. You know, sometimes when somebody says, I want to get rid of the welfare state, that's not, I want to, you know, hurt poor black people. It's, I don't like welfare. It's like, I don't like, you know, welfare policies. I think they encourage bad habits that keep people poor. You know, that's my thing. I don't like the concept of dog whistles because it allows people to basically make sort of a non-falsifiable argument. It's like, you're a secret racist, and I know you're a secret racist because you're saying this thing that some racists sometimes talk about. And if you're saying the same thing a racist says, then that must mean you are also racist. So, yeah. Stephen Blythe, do you think we will become more divided in the next 4 years? I also support you on Patreon and keep up the good work. Well, thank you for your continued support, Stephen Blythe. And do I think we'll become divided more in the next 4 years? That's going to heavily depend on what the next 2 years look like, unfortunately. It's like, I don't think if we do become more divided in the next 4 years, it won't be as quickly as it would be if Trump was in office, I think. Trump just has this ability and had the inclination to just, you know, make things worse in terms of like domestic politics. All right, Readout Productions. It's interesting that, at least in my own opinion, the boomers and millennials seem to get most of the focus in U.S. politics, political divide, while Gen X and Gen Z aren't talking points by the left or right. Well, for one, I think a big reason why is because there aren't any major politicians from Gen X or Gen Z at the moment. You know, like Gen X has kind of been overlooked when it comes to politics. There are Gen X politicians, but most of them aren't sort of seen as Gen X. And there aren't really any major Gen Z politicians either. So that's one of the reasons why. Also, just the fact that the boomers and millennials are just so much bigger in terms of just sheer size. You know, there were more boomers than Gen Xers, and there are more millennials than there are Gen Z. And so just sheer numbers, they're going to have more attention paid to them. Philippe Garcia, it will be really enjoyable to see you making a video with Atun Sheo. I would love to do something with him at some point, but, you know, just has to be something that makes sense. I did get Atun Shea to provide some voice work for my Holodomor video. And so, you know, he has some voice work in part 1 of my Holodomor trilogy, and he has some voice work in part 2 that will be coming out sometime next month. Fish, setting aside racism. If any individual dropped out of 1976 into 2021, might they think they were experiencing Orwell's 1984? I don't know. I mean, a lot of the people who were around in 1976 are still here in 2021. Like Joe Biden. Joe Biden was in the Senate, was a senator in 1976, and he is now currently president in 2021. So I don't think so, because most of the people who are around then would recognize it because though they were here. Let's see, Alec Leeper, who could be the next Democratic president if not Kamala? Well, I'm not sure. I mean, unfortunately, the Democrats are still kind of recovering from the Obama years, because like the Obama years was pretty bad for the Democrats, especially like at the state and local level. Like they lost, like in the Obama years, Democrats lost over 1,000 elected offices across the United States, and they are still recovering from that. That's like one of the few saving graces the Republicans have right now, is that they still have a little they still have a little breathing room in terms of local and state offices. So yeah, I don't know who. Kamala obviously is the next in line to be the next Democratic president. I don't know. She will, I think. She's definitely the front runner to be the next Democratic nominee. Fish, fish, fish. What is Patreon? Well, time to plug Patreon. So Patreon is a crowdfunding platform that a bunch of internet creators are on that allow individual viewers like yourself to contribute money to any kind of online creator on a monthly basis, so long as that online creator has an account with them. And that online creator can offer different perks, such as getting to see videos early, getting your names in the end of videos, and many other things, depending on what that individual creator does. There's no shortage of explanations for what Patreon is on YouTube, so you can go ahead and check those out whenever you're done here. Novogra asks, do you think there's a meaningful difference between nationalism and patriotism? I have to get back to you on that. I think there is one. I'm just not sure exactly how to phrase it. Fish, fish. Okay, now they're talking to each other. Spencer Waldschen, Jeff Bezos just stepped down from Amazon. Yes. And of course, like everyone else thinks like, oh, he's going to spend all his spare time fighting Superman because he looks like Lex Luthor. Ha 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 ha. Yeah. He's still going to be involved. He's going to be playing a very Bill Gates role in Amazon's future, I think. It was similar to how Bill Gates plays his role with Microsoft. It's like, yeah, he's technically not the guy in charge anymore, but he still has a lot of sway. See, fish, 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 but I don't know where to go to become a patron. Well, to become a patron, you go to www.patreon.com/whatever creator you're going to. For me, it's, patreon.com/casualhistorian. That's where you find my Patreon page and see all the perks of being there. All right. Stephen Blythe, did you like Andrew Yang? I liked Andrew Yang as a person. I just don't think he's very good when it comes to like public policy. Yeah, I don't think he's very good on public policy because he's one of the people, like his big thing, was bringing the idea of the universal basic income into popular politics. And there are a number of issues with that. Some people are talking about how it sort of disincentivizes work, which is a bad thing. You don't want to disincentivize people from working because working is how most people get out of poverty. However, and the other issue with him is that he's kind of one of these people who are proposing UBI, but it's like the left-wing version of UBI, because some UBI proponents will talk about how, Richard Nixon and Friedrich Hayek supported UBI, so you right-wingers should be all on board. It's like, but Nixon and Hayek supported a version of UBI that required the abolition of every other welfare program. The idea behind UBI from Nixon and Hayek was that, we'll replace the currently existing welfare state with a universal basic income instead. But what people like Yang and most in the Democratic Party want to do is they want to add UBI on top of everything, which is sort of fiscally unsustainable. Let's see, Alec Leeper, with so much control of modern media, not the mainstream and social by the left, how do conservatives reach Gen Z? Well, I think you reach Gen Z. For one, I think it's a lot easier for the GOP to reach people than we think. It's just that it requires them to do one very important thing. Stop being crazy. That's step one. Stop bringing on the crazies. Like, I really want the GOP to wage a war on the QAnon people the way like William F. Buckley in National Review waged a war on the Birchers back in the 60s. And that's the weird thing. So it's like QAnon has much more hold in the current Republican Party than the Birchers ever did. Which is concerning. But yeah, that's the first thing they need to do is to stop being crazy. And unfortunately, the Republicans kind of need to stop talking about taxes and tax rates. Because, like, unfortunately, unless you're an already big, successful business person, that's just not super appealing to most people. Instead, they need to focus on economic mobility. So, put in place policies that make it easier for a person living in, like, a poorer region to move to a richer area where they can get a job. And stuff like that. Philip Garcia, ever think about doing a book review of the Protocols of the Wise Man of Zion? Learned Elders of Zion, I think is the thing. And, well, not a book review because, well, it's not a book you'd really want to review. It's obviously false. It was Russian, it was Tsarist propaganda. But I have thought about doing a video about sort of the history of it, its origin, and, what's been done with it since its inception. Alec Leeper, do you think Yang will be able to win the New York City mayoral race? I don't think so. Yang is, although he has a much better public name recognition now, I still don't think that's enough to win New York City. Plus, New York City is like a terrible place. Like, New York City is a terrible place to become mayor if you want to, like, get higher up in national politics. Because, like, the mayors of New York are almost, like, predestined to fail in national politics. Let's see. Spencer Waldschen. The GOP is also at an inherent disadvantage trying to appeal to Gen Z because younger people are generally more liberal. Well, you can play ideological games with names, but the general perception is that they're more left-wing and yes and no. Like, something to realize is that, like, in 1972, Richard Nixon won the youth vote. Think about that. Like, he won the youth vote in 1972. Do you know who also won the youth vote when they ran? Ronald Reagan. So I think right-wingers can, in fact, win the youth vote. It's just a matter of how you're able to market them and, keeping your crazies out. Let's see. Philip Garcia, was Philip Drew really that bad of a reading? It was bad. It was not a good book. It's in the public domain, so you can do with it whatever you want, but it is not a good book. It is mostly like long soliloquies from the character Philip Drew, speaking about, the progressive issues of the time, especially from that whole, from a much more of a Wilsonian kind of liberalism. All right. Check a few things here. All right. Everything's looking good there. Okay. See, Ron Hawthorne. The The current GOP has no interest in the things you're talking about. Keeping the poor in their place and maintaining the current status quo was their platform. Well, technically speaking, they don't have a platform. They didn't have one for 2020. Yeah, so that's the thing. They don't have a platform. Let's see. Spencer Waldschen, it's definitely possible for the GOP to win the youth vote. It's just harder for them than the Dems, in my opinion. Yes, I would say it is. And again, it's harder for conservatives to win votes. Conservatism is rarely a popular ideology, largely because conservatism is all about telling people no. It's like, no, we can't do that. We can't afford it, or it's stupid. Whereas Democrats are like, progress, we can do it. You know? Even if you actually can't, you know? It's a lot easier to get people to go along with them by saying, hey, it's like basically, who would you rather, like if you're a young person who doesn't have any money or assets to your name, who would you rather vote for? The person who's telling you, okay, I want you to, you know, like who do you want to vote for in that situation? The person who's promising to write you a check, or the person who wants to make it easier for you to go out and earn your own check? For most young people who don't have any assets, for most young and or poor people who don't have assets, they're going to go for the person who's promising them just to write a straight check to them. Yeah, so. All right, fish, fish, fish. Have some really great photos from space. Beautiful. Yeah, that's a nice resource. And Rissus TF, how will Amash, Massey, or Paul get no compromise legislation through? I feel like libertarianism is an all or nothing ideology, and that compromise really just neuters what is good about it. Well, for them, it's all about tailoring the kind of legislation or things you want to do. Like something, you know, it's like you want to narrowly tailor what you're doing. So, like say the drug war, you know, like there are a number of, you know, libertarian type Republicans and a lot of Democrats who would be on board with ending the drug war. You would just need an executive who is, you know, can meet them in the middle. Or with, say, things like criminal justice reform. You know, there are things that can be done. You know, like I said, some libertarian Republicans and many Democrats would want to do something like that as well. There are lots of things that can be done. It's just you have to tailor all the legislation to be pretty narrow in order to accomplish it. See, that one Hawks fan, how should the GOP attract more minorities? I think what it needs to do is implement policies that make economic mobility easier. So things like some of the Reformicon stuff was pretty good ideas there. And putting in more economic incentives to work. You know, encourage the habits and behaviors that get people out of poverty. That is, I think, a big way they can do it. Also, not having people like Donald Trump who just repel them is another good way. See, Readout Productions. What American historical events do you feel deserve far more prominent recognition in curriculum than they presently receive? Personally, I want more talk on the WV Mind War and other labor movements. I would like it if they were more detailed in their discussion about the writing of the Constitution, because like you learn the Cliff Notes version in most schools, but there's so much more to talk about with it, especially if you go into James Madison's notes on the Constitution. Like, as it turns out, the 3/5 compromise, which the popular understanding is that it declared slaves to be 3/5 of a person, when in reality it was actually an anti-slavery measure. You know, in fact, you know, Northerners wanted slaves not counted at all, and Southerners wanted them counted as whole persons. Not counting them at all was an anti-slavery position, because if you let slaves be counted as persons, and when it came to purposes of political representation, but not give them the vote, then you're basically giving their masters, their owners, far more political power to keep them enslaved. So stuff like that, I think I would like to get more attention. See, Felipe Garcia, a bit aged question, but how did you feel about the Game of Thrones finale? Like, I don't know if that's exactly how George R.R. Martin wanted it to end, but he now knows what to avoid. So yeah, I was not a huge fan of it. I've become more embittered with it since the moment I watched it. You know, it's like like everyone else, I think it was rushed. You know, they could have easily had another 2 or 3 seasons to wrap that up, and you know, George R.R. Martin and the others were willing to, and HBO were willing to give them that much. But you know, D&D didn't want to stay on for that long because they had a Star Wars trilogy they were promised that was then taken away from them. Stephen Blythe, are you in favor of a third party? As much as I usually like the idea of a third party, I don't think it would really work. It's like, and historically speaking, the role third parties have always played in American politics is they serve as partly spoiler, but more importantly, they serve as sort of incubators for other political ideas. You know, it's like you have like a right-wing third party comes up with some new idea that in the next election cycle, the Republicans will take on as their own. Or vice versa, a left-wing third party will bring up some new idea that gains a lot of traction, and then in the next cycle, they'll take it as their own. That's typically the role third parties play. Alex Winter, what is your least favorite J.J. McCullough video? Oh, gosh. That's probably one of his, like, National Leaders of a Country videos, but I haven't watched all of those. I haven't watched all of his videos, so I can't say which is my least favorite, at least in an objective sense. Let's see, Ron Hawthorne. I don't believe the libertarian ideology can work at the nation-state level, if at all. Just about every crazy idea has been tried, yet never a single libertarian government anywhere. Well, I don't know. I mean, some ideas that the libertarians have endorsed have been tried elsewhere. Like in Portugal, they've done the decriminalizing all drugs in Portugal. And last I heard, it was doing okay, but I'd have to double check on that. Alec Leeper, what are your thoughts on Biden's cabinet secretaries? I, like many people, were expecting people to be more extreme, but it turns out it's mostly just a bunch of leftovers or holdovers from the Obama administration. So more or less, the Biden administration so far is just kind of looking like it's the third term of Barack Obama. That's about it. Stephen Blythe, besides Cypher, do you collaborate with any other historians that we saw in the 1776 thing? Well, I've collaborated with Mr. Beat a few times. See, of the others, I haven't collaborated with US 101, with Heimler, or with Tiger Star. So I guess the only ones I've collaborated with on that group have been Cypher and Mr. Beat. Fish, fish, fish. Broadly stated, jobs replaced slavery. Read Taylor's Scientific Principles of Management. I've heard that name. It's on my reading list for a while, but haven't gotten around to it. That one Hawks fan. Most right-wing Democratic countries in West and East. Well, it's hard to think, because like what makes someone a right-winger varies from country to country. Being a right-winger in the U.S. isn't the same as being a right-winger in France or in Germany. Novogra, what do you think it means to be a conservative in 2021? Seems like the GOP has conceded on every issue they once fought for. Well, they conceded on all these issues, or seemingly, mostly because they've been following sort of a personality cult for the last 5 years or so. I think the conservative instinct in the modern world is that you don't want to give something up that's pretty good right now for an uncertain future. So it's basically, the idea is slow down. Let's not be too hasty here. That's sort of the conservative mindset, is don't be too hasty. So yeah, Alec Leaper, am I missing something? Do you dislike J.J. McCullough? Oh, no, not at all. Oh, I don't dislike J.J. McCullough at all. Somebody asked me if I had a least favorite J.J. video. And I just say, it's like, I don't know which one would be my least favorite. I like most of his videos. So, you know, that hopefully clarifies something there. Have faith. What is Trump's next move? Post non-conviction impeachment. Well, he's mentioned stuff about, you know, wanting to help Republicans in the 2022 midterms. So I think that'll be his sort of testing ground. I think Trump is planning to watch the 2022 midterms, assuming he's not convicted. He's planning to watch the 2022 midterms, see how well his faction of the Republican Party does, and decide whether or not to run again in 2024 based on that performance. You know, it's like, if they perform well, he'll probably take another swing at it. If they don't, he might just slink into final retirement. Okay, let's see. Garfield Alighieri, what is the worst case for Republicans come 2022 midterms? I think the worst case is that all of the moderates and old guard establishment Republicans either lose or choose not to run again, while all of the MAGA, Trumpist, QAnon types become the dominant force within the party. Because if they become the dominant force within the party, then the Republican Party will become a rump party at that point. In which case, we could end up seeing more of a 1930s to 1950s type situation for Republicans. You know, like another FDR Truman era, if you will. Let's see. Hit it home. What was the problem with Monsieur Z? And is there a video I can watch that explains it? I don't think I've actually watched any Monsieur V videos. I just know from other history people in the history community, they've mentioned that he is a fan of like ethno-states. It's like he's a big fan of ethno-states and whatnot. I think, like Tiger Star said something about it before, or how he's like scientific racism and ethno-states type stuff that he's been really into. And other than that, he's like, you see like a lot of his videos, it's like he does alternate history videos, and a lot of them are like, what if country X went fascist? It's like, you've made a lot of these videos. It's a little concerning. Let's see, Stephen Blythe, who do you think was the best and worst president sans Trump or Obama? Well, best is obviously, of course, usually pick George Washington. But if I have to exclude George Washington from the best list, I would probably put Calvin Coolidge. And for worst, it changes day to day. Usually it's Woodrow Wilson, but sometimes worst president I pick is FDR. But you know, that changes on a day-to-day basis. All right. Opinions on Ben Sasse? He's cool. I listen to him sometimes on the Jonah Goldberg's podcast, The Remnant. Okay, fish. Totally off topic, but I am peeved off that The Office was removed from Netflix. In a world of politically correct culture, I miss the comedic relief from that. I never watched The Office. I was never really a fan of it. I wasn't a big fan of the faux documentary thing. So yeah, I have no comments on that. But we are just about at the 2-hour mark now, so I think I am going to call an end to the stream about right here. So, one last question from Devin Canada, a patron. Hello, Devin. One last question. Was Harding really as bad a president as people say? The problem with Harding was that there was a lot of corruption in his administration. There's debate over whether or not he was directly responsible for it, or if it was more like a Ulysses S. Grant situation where he simply trusted the wrong people. I don't know enough about the Harding administration to give a strong answer for that. But yeah, that's the reason why, is because there was a lot of corruption, like Teapot Dome. So, like I said, I think, we're at the 2-hour mark now, so I think I'm going to call an end to the live stream here. Thank you guys all for taking the time to watch this, and we will be back again next month on the first Tuesday, which is March 2nd. So, yeah, we'll be back here again March 2nd, and there should be a new video on the channel next Tuesday. So, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys all later.